It's really a privilege to be here, and it's wonderful to be here. I do have a special place in my heart for people serving God in whatever capacity, but a particularly special place in my heart for people like yourselves here today, directly or indirectly involved in ministry. So it's very wonderful to be here. I did introduce myself because I thought, let me not take any of the time when I know I have to use a little bit of time here to say who I am. Anyway, so my name is Olu, and I think my full name is Olu Robbin-Coker. And it shows that I'm in an international audience, because normally when I say that to Danes, they laugh, because they think, oh, that's a bit of a long name. But I'm sure there's people here who might have even longer names than me. Today I work as a psychologist, but as Clement mentioned, I used to work for a missions organization, Youth with a Mission in English, and I did quite a bit of training of young people who had a heart for missions. It's not I'm trying to argue for my qualifications. I'm not qualified to be up here. But I'll just give you a little bit of my background. And I've also worked as an assistant to a pastor responsible for the young people in a church I was in Dundee. I'm presently living in Holstebro. I don't represent my church, but presently, I say presently because with me you never know. When I came to Denmark, I started in the Pentecostal church in Holstebro, and then I was part of one of the leaders in a house church for several years, up to 10 years almost actually, and presently the last year I've been attending Nørland's Folkekirke in Holstebro. And I just try and read the times and read where I feel God's directing me as best as I can. As you all know, this hearing from God business is no easy business, but we try and seek God's wisdom and His direction as He guides us on different parts of our journey. And it's with that in mind, this need for God's wisdom, which I'll say a little bit more at the end, that I want to share with you some thoughts. This whole expression of being in the world but not of the world is one which I've thought about a lot and I've heard mentioned a lot, and I'm sure it's not a new subject from you. I just want to give my own angle on it. Let me start by saying this way. We all know that this Christian journey can be a very difficult one. Let's be honest. How many people think sometimes this Christian journey can be challenging? Okay, there's about 3 of us. Oh no, the rest of it. I often say, I do an honesty test every now and then. Do your best to pass it. And that was my first honesty test. How many people think the Christian journey can be difficult? You know? All right, you passed. I became a Christian by one of these, as a teenager around 15, by one of these messages that my interpretation of it might not have been what the preacher was saying, but by one of these messages that for me, I thought they were saying, come to Jesus and everything will be fine. But my experience in reality was, come to Jesus and things are going to get tough sometimes, really tough. You know, and again, how many recognize that? You thought we have all the wonderful scriptures, you know, come to me all who labor and are heavy laden and I will give you rest. Yes, all that is true, you know, all that is true. But imagine a teenager really thinking, I'll just become a Christian and everything will be fine, and getting the shock of his life and finding out, no, everything isn't fine. And in fact, I went through what I now look back upon as a wonderful period in my Christian faith, where I believe God gave me a really strong foundation, where actually it's as if I kept finding all these difficult scriptures about suffering and persecution and the difficulties, and it kind of woke me up and said, whoa, okay, actually, the reality is that the Christian journey can be very tough. And we need to accept that. We need to accept that as a reality. And one of the things I think that can be very tough in the Christian journey is navigating this secular world that we live in. Finding our place in it, finding the right balance of being in the world, because we can't just abandon this world. Some of us would like to, but we can't abandon this world. Let me start by reading the Bible passage where this is taken from. I'm reading from the NIV. And Jesus has this prayer. I'll read it first, then I'll give a little bit of background and look around a little bit. I start all the way in 13, even though it says 14 there, just to give it a little bit more context. I'm coming to you now, but I say these things while I'm still in the world, so that they may have the full measure of my joy within them. So Jesus is praying for his disciples. Some of your Bibles will have the title of Jesus prays for his disciples. Some will even have the title of the high priestly prayer. Yeah? And it starts in 14. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them, for they are not of the world, any more than I am of the world. My prayer is not that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of it. Sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. And just to finish it up again, to give it context, Jesus goes on to say in 18 and 19, as you sent me into the world, I have sent them into the world. For them I sanctify myself, that they too may be truly sanctified. So I want you to imagine, I've been enjoying, in fact I have one of the pictures here, I've been really enjoying watching these Chosen video series. How many people have seen some of this Chosen stuff? You know, sometimes people get upset, but it's not always historically accurate, they add a lot of stuff. I don't want to be controversial, forgive me. I know this is not exactly 100% Bible truth, but I like the way it creates a bit of context around the life of Jesus and his disciples. So, what I think is really important to know about the context of this Bible verse is Jesus was about to leave, or he was preparing his disciples for the fact that he was going to leave them behind in this world. And there's two extremes that we are faced with when we're in this world, but we don't want to be of the world, but we are in this world. And this is what Jesus and his disciples were facing a lot. Jesus' disciples were facing. When Jesus leaves, they're going to be in this world. And there's a part of us, again, let's be honest, that honesty test again. There's a part of us that sometimes thinks, God, just take me out of this world. I don't want to be in this world. Separate me from the world. We have the desert fathers, for example. We have, in the history of Christianity, some people are called, and some people are not called to it, but they run. But the reality is, some people think, I don't want to be in this world. But Jesus specifically prays to the Father and says, I don't want you to take them out of the world. So it would be much easier if we create our Christian ghettos and society. I'll be really honest with you. Some of the easiest times for me to be a Christian was when I was part of YWAM, and we all lived in this lovely building where we had morning devotions and worship and all sorts of great stuff going on all the time. Clement laughs because he knows it's true. It was easy to be a Christian amongst other Christians, doing Christian things all day long. It was lovely. It was a small taste of heaven. Can you relate to that? It is a small taste of heaven. So it would be easy for Jesus wanting his disciples abandoned. Jesus' disciples wanting, take us with you, God. Put us to one side. Let's create. And some people did do that. There were groups of Jews back then who separated themselves from their society and their culture. But of course it meant they had no impact. So that's the one side. On the other side, we might want to think, let's just become a part of it. Let's just adopt all the values and cultures. We are one of the, and again, I've seen people make that mistake where they go too far the other way. So some want to escape completely. Some, they just go too far where you really cannot see. Jesus was very clear in the Beatitudes, Matthew 5. Let your light so shine before men that they see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. There's something about the way we are as Christians that should point to Christ. And if people can not tell the difference between you and people of the world, then you've gone too far. There's a problem there somewhere. So it is a tricky thing, and it's very difficult to be in this situation where we are Christians. We have this world that we live in. There's challenges, there's values, there's all sorts of stuff attacking us. I'll be honest with you. One of the greatest challenges for me and in my life is basically social media. Because all the time it's pumping values that I don't necessarily agree with. And sometimes it's so subtle and so soft that I miss it. And you know, each generation of Christians think, oh, it's so tough for us. But I don't think it's new. I think what I'm facing by being bombarded by the culture around me, and this is why I feel like the Chosen TV series sometimes gives you an idea of, actually, these guys were under Roman occupation where the Romans were trying to turn them into Romans. And they really were fighting to keep their Jewish faith and their Jewish culture. And within this context, Jesus is praying for these disciples because in the same way he had to leave behind. Philippians tells us he left behind his Father. He left behind his glory. He humbled himself to come and be on earth, but to be in the world, but not of the world. He was basically trying to do the same for the disciples. He was trying to send them into this world to represent him, to be ambassadors. Not to escape, not to hide in the desert like some of the other Jewish groups did, but to actually be there. And that was risky in so many ways. Risky in the fact that they might get sucked in to the worldly system, but risky also that if they stand too much against the worldly system, there will be some repercussions. They will be persecuted. The Romans weren't happy when the Jews stood up for their own values and what was important to them. And again, this is a reality. I always say, don't go out looking for persecution, but I promise you, there will come times in your life where if you truly stand up for what you believe is right, it will come to you. So definitely don't go looking for it, but it will come to you. And it's with this in mind, Jesus comes with his prayer, asking God to help them. Not asking God to take them out, but saying, I want them here, but God, protect them. They need your protection. They need your preservation in this society, in this world, where there are values that are so directly against how we understand biblical values. Now I know I'm not going to say anything too controversial today, I promise. But in a room with this much diversity, we won't even agree on all the biblical values, let's be honest. But there are some core things that I think most of us will agree on, and we can see that many times the world is pulling in a different direction from the direction we believe God is calling us to. Let's take, for example, I think it was very amusing, but it's actually quite a good example how many times people jokingly but truthfully saying, I have one wife. But because we live in a culture, and I'm not even talking about Muslims or that have polygamy, but we live in a culture where even some people who would call themselves Christians might have more than one partner. So something we made a little joke out of is a good example of, there are some other values in this culture that actually might draw someone towards having more than one partner. So we are in this challenging situation where we want to live out these Christian values. We believe God has called us to live out these Christian values. I have a couple examples. Many of them you know. Like I said, I just want to put my own little spin on this. But since I was a young Christian, someone like Daniel has inspired me. Because many of us, we know, one of the things we know and love Daniel for is this character and integrity he had, his faithfulness, where when he was put in a situation to compromise, he stood up for truth. He said, I won't compromise. So whether we're talking about the story where they were meant to bow down before someone who was not God, and they said no, and they got thrown in the fire, and God protected them. Or whether we're talking about the time he ended up in the lion's den, again, because he stood up for what was right. But what I don't often hear people talk about is the fact that Daniel was very much in the world and a part of the system. He didn't withdraw and hide in a corner. That's why he got put in challenging situations. If you hide in a corner, if you create your own little Christian ghetto, then you won't be challenged. You won't be faced with situations where actually you are vulnerable, you are in danger. But if you think about Daniel's situation, the classic story that I really love is when it came down to something as concrete as food, where they say, we want to eat our own diet. We don't want to eat, we're going to eat your food, but we want to at least be able to choose which aspects of your food we're going to eat. And I'm going to come back to that later, because there's a very simple principle I try my best to use and to teach people to use. Even my nephew, I was talking to him on the phone the other day, and I said, this is the principle that I try and use. In every culture, there will be things that are positive, things that are neutral, and things that are negative. And we're going to need discernment from God to sort it out. And you know what? There were many things that Daniel and his friends adopted or learned or engaged with in the Babylonian culture, the Babylonian wisdom. We know now, looking back, that the Babylonian civilization was one of the cleverest civilizations. They were well ahead of their time. In the same way we are amazed by the Romans, they were well ahead of their time. They were, as my wife, she's Danish, she's a Viking, so I'm not being racist. She says, whilst Danes were running around making fools of themselves, the Romans actually had running water and flushing toilets. While the Danes were still raping and pillaging and in their teenage phase of civilization, those Romans actually had flushing toilets. And it's the same with the Babylonians. In their wisdom, they were well ahead of their time. And Daniel and his friends, they did not reject the learning that was available to them. And we would be fools to reject the learning that is available to us in a culture, because like I said, every culture has positive, neutral, and negative, and he's trying to work it out. I'm not saying it's easy. So they embraced much of the learning that was available to them. But when it came to which type of food they should eat, they asked. They didn't even insist. They could have been very dramatic. Just kill us, we're not eating your food. But they said, no, we have the food we want to eat. Just give us these vegetables, but please, some of the other stuff, we don't want that. When they challenged them to bow down before false idols, again, there they drew the line. So it's important that we know when to draw the line. But sometimes I think we can be too quick to reject everything in the culture. Ooh, that's wrong. Because I don't recognize it. Because it doesn't make sense to me. You know, I'm married to a Dane, so trust me, discussions about culture, they've been going on for 20 years and they'll continue to keep going on, you know. Because even something like how we raise our children, that's been a tough one for me sometimes, you know. She thinks I'm too hard, I think she's too soft, you know. My kids even talk about, what are we going to get today? Is it the crazy African dad? Now I've decided I've got these two personas, the crazy African dad or the Danish psychologist dad. You can guess which one is good at listening and which one is like, just do it! You know, but it's been a journey for me to learn so many things about the Danish culture and the Danish way of raising children. My first instinct many times was to reject it. And there's still things in Danish culture about how you raise kids that I reject. But there's so many wonderful things that I've learned from Danish culture about raising children. And it would have been a shame if in my arrogance, in my judgmental attitude, I'd have just rejected it all. In English, I like the expression, it says, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I have a few examples I want to share with you. One of the people who's inspired me a lot, we've lost him now, unfortunately. I used to follow his podcasts for quite a while. And he's called Timothy Keller. And what was interesting about Timothy Keller was that Timothy Keller was the pastor of Redeemed Presbyterian Church in New York. He just had a way of communicating with the people around him, because he lived in a very, very liberal context and secular context there in New York. How many know Timothy Keller? Have read his books or listened to him? Great guy. Lots of wonderful stuff. But one of the things that inspired me was about his way of communicating in such a non-judgmental way, such an accepting way, but still standing up for Christ and being very clear and pointing to Jesus Christ. He has some wonderful sermons that I just read. The way he wrote his books too. Again, well, he wasn't quick. Many of his sermons were very topical. He used current affairs. He used whatever he could. In fact, in many ways, it reminds me of Paul. One of the examples I've heard people use very well is how Paul debated with these guys on the Areopagus, Mars Hill, where he understood a little bit who they were, and they had this monument to the unknown God, and he used it as a platform to communicate. And I think when we are in the world, we're part of the world. We embrace the good, but we reject the bad. It would actually also give us a platform and some openings to speak to people in a way that they can understand, in a way that they can relate. One of the things, when I was in YWAM, actually, I was never officially part of it, but I once, when they had teaching on frontier missions, I joined for a week to understand what is it, actually it was 2 weeks, what is it that frontier missionaries do? One of the strengths of frontier missions is their ability to go into a culture and say, what does the Christian life look like here? Not what can I import from England or Denmark or USA and bring it to these people and say, this is how you do Christianity. But how can we just take Christianity to some of its most fundamental values and say, what does this look like in this culture? And I think that is the constant journey we are on. As our culture evolves, we say, okay, we are in this world. We have to stand up for our faith. We have to reject everything that is not of biblical morality, or that everything that is not of Christ. But what can we do? How can we find expression for the Christian faith in different contexts? My two talks overlap a little bit, so I'm keeping tempted to say some stuff I meant to say tomorrow. But tomorrow I'll come with some more. But ultimately, we are in this world. It was never God's intention, it was never Christ's intention to remove us, to overprotect us from the world. It was always Christ's intention, like it was for the disciples, it is for us, that we will be in this world. And that we will make a difference in this world, and we would understand this culture. And that's where I think that, especially as Christian leaders with influence in other people's lives, both young and old, there's a tremendous responsibility in having that wisdom. Because let me give you an example. I remember last time I was here, I think it was Pastor Joy, who asked me something about the young people, and it keeps coming back to me again and again. sometimes, I'm just going to say it direct, sometimes the young people just think we're crazy, especially when Olu's in his crazy African dad mood, yeah? Because for them, if they can see something in the culture that is maybe neutral at worst and positive at best, but because of me and my old-fashioned thinking, I reject it, then they just simply can't relate to me. You know, my kids sometimes, they just cannot relate to me with my interpretation of certain things. And this is why I have to challenge myself. Actually, is this a right or wrong issue that is at play here? Or could it be something much more neutral? And this is the challenge we face all the time. To say, if we throw the baby out with the bathwater, then we risk isolating ourselves and rejecting and excluding people who might be open to the Christian faith, including our own family members or children, because we don't have the discernment and wisdom to find out the difference between positive, negative, and neutral. You know? But it's important to say we do have to stand up for what's right. When we know what's right, we do have to stand. We don't have to compromise. If I could give a personal example where I've been tempted, tested regularly in terms of my integrity, where I will be in the world and engage with the world, but I will not compromise, you're going to laugh at me. But it's about taxes. Why am I going on about taxes? I'm self-employed, yeah? So basically, I have to report my taxes. I have opportunities of buying things under the company. There's so many things you can do that are right on the edge. Sometimes over the line, but sometimes right on the edge. Like I remember someone come to me, Olu, you should be buying phones for the whole family and the kids and just put it in under your company. I'm like, really? Yeah, he said, I buy a new phone every year, and then you can write it off and you give it to your kid, and then you buy a new one. So I went and checked with my accountant. My accountant's like, no, Olu, that's not legal. The truth is, when it's such an amount, we're not talking about 10, 20, 50, 100,000, SCAT probably won't check, but it's not right. And my friend was really trying to convince me, you can just do it, you know? And I'm like, no. And there was a time I actually questioned my own motives. I said to myself, Olu, is it just because you're applying for Danish citizenship you're scared of messing up? I had to check my own motives there. But the truth is, even after I got my Danish citizenship, I'm still behaving myself. In fact, I've never driven so well in my whole life than while I was waiting for my application to be processed. Always under the speed limit, you know. And I'm trying to behave myself still and keep on. I say, you've been doing it for 1.5, 2 years now. Why don't you just keep going and obey the law? You know. But we will have these temptations, and none of us are perfect. None of us are, least of all me. So we've all screwed up. We sometimes have to find our bearings, you know. Sometimes we do get sucked into the world and its values, and then we have to check ourselves, or we have good friends or partners who help us check ourselves to come back in line. But it's there to remember. And for me, I put it this way. You know, when sometimes I'm faced with these tax decisions where I always say it's my accountant's job to find me some good ways to save me money. But it's not his job to help me break the law. And that's not my intention either, you know? So he's very good at finding some nice legal loopholes we can exploit every now and then, but we stay within the bounds of legality. But in all our situations, we will be faced. I remember also, another quick example, I remember also one time I was in a situation where someone from my work, one of the senior people, was pressuring me. Basically, I'm going to be very honest with you, they were pressuring me a little bit to overcharge for some services I provided. This was quite a few years ago. And I remember remember one time, actually, I made a mistake. And I remember how bad I felt, because I thought, what if this guy thinks I was trying to cheat him? You know? That's not the signal I want to say. I don't want to confirm any prejudice they already have. Oh, these black people, they're trying to sneak something past us. But I remember being under a lot of pressure when senior people in your organization are basically asking, and then I said, I'm just not doing this. I just, you know, I might do something to help the organization, but I still have to stand before God and account for what I did or didn't do. I still am an ambassador and representative of Christ, so I need to take that. So I hope you can hear my heart, that it's a lot about finding this balance between, like Jesus said, don't take them out of the world. Don't try and escape the world. Don't withdraw from the world. Don't reject everything in the world, because there are things that might be neutral or positive in the world. Because remember, we are all God's children. Every ounce of creativity and beauty and ability that lies within a human has its origins in God. It's us that corrupt it sometimes, too often really. But there's so many things in so many cultures, even in the secular world, that come from God's children, so have directly or indirectly been inspired by God. But on the other hand, we are not of this world. And we don't adopt the world's values. We don't adopt the world's standards. We live by other standards. And even though as tempting as it might be sometimes to bend, and I promise you, I'm tempted too, and I don't always succeed in resisting these temptations that come, and then I have to go and repent and get myself back on track. But we have to find that place there of being in the world, but not of it. I want to leave you with a short reflection where maybe you can just take a few minutes to talk to your neighbor about it. I'm not going to open up for questions because I know that you're tired and you need a break and drink some stuff. Maybe if you have some questions, you can grab me in the coffee break or something, or tomorrow. I'm here all weekend, so. But just take a couple of minutes to reflect and think, and maybe share with your neighbor a just very simple question there. How can you engage with your community while maintaining Christian values? You know? One of the things I started doing a couple of years ago is volunteering in one of our local projects and just making sure I'm out there. And it's really wonderful. I meet some wonderful people there. And there's a lot of Muslims there, actually. I'm part of, yeah. I'm finishing now, so let me just stick to the reflection. But ask yourself, are there, some of you are already doing this, so as they say in the UK, you're preaching to the choir, you know. Some of you, maybe there's some new thoughts you have, new reflections you have from what I've shared today.